Hello everyone, here today to start a video on some things with cross sections here. I ran into something on a recent job where I wanted to create my own cross section name boundary DGN library. I wanted to be able to have the EOR logo in the sheet every time I cut my sheets. I didn't want to have to run through all my sheets after the fact and put that logo in there, so I was trying to figure out a way to basically create my own cross-section seed file. So what I ended up doing is I started over here in the FDOT Connect, Organizational Civil, FDOT, DGN Lib, sheet seeds, and I tried just copying this cross-section name boundary DGN Lib and basically just adding that logo in there into the sheet model, but I was having a hard time getting it to come up in the drop-down menu when I was actually cutting my cross-section sheets. I was seeing duplicate entries for this cross-section name boundary in this file, but not seeing the new file I was creating. And after talking to DOT a little bit, I think what I needed to do is, you may be able to get that to work, but you'd have to change everything in every little spot. So what I ended up doing is just grabbing this cross-section start seed, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to come over here to my sample project location, and I need to create a standards folder, which if you created your workset template and had all the folders, that would have already been present for you. And then another folder called DGN Lib. And I'm going to paste that in there. And we're just going to call this sample access start seed.dgn lib. So I want to change the extension of that, and it's going to ask me if I want to change it, and yep, I want to do that. So I'm basically just starting from scratch, creating my own cross-section name boundary file that I'm going to use. And the reason I put it in this folder is because the configuration variables are already looking to this location to find this. Now, it's looking in one of the configuration variables, but we're going to have to change a different configuration variable to have both of them make sure that they're pointing to here, and I'll show you how to do that. So I have MicroStation open, and I'm just open to one of the files in there. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that new file. And yeah, we can set it to the active workspace, because what I'm essentially doing is creating a project-specific cross-section seed file, which is kind of what the intent of this is. So I would essentially create one of these for every new thing. So right now I'm in the default 3D, so I want to be in this multi-model view. And you can see in this seed file, what they've done to set it up is they created a complex element with an active profile on it. So that allows us to come in here and create our own named boundary. So I'm going to do place name boundary. Let's click in here, and I want to set my scale here. I don't know if this really matters, but I'm just kind of covering all the bases here because I know my cross sections, I want them to be 20 scale. So we're going to set that and come in here. Let's place our name boundary. And I'm going to do the civil cross section. And because we're doing a seed file, we're basically going to select none. Now, some of these things I need to do is I need to set the detail scale I want to use. So you could also follow this if you want to create a cross-section sheet seed file that was a different scale than the typical 2010. And we'll create a new group, and we're just going to call it sample access. And you don't really need a description. So let's start here. It wants us to identify a path element. So I'm going to click. Now it's just giving me a start location that's moving. And it changed my group as soon as I clicked on that because it's essentially trying to pull the name of that complex element. So let's just change this again. And I'm just looking at some of the stations here, so we'll do a start station of 30. And we only want to drop one name boundary, so we're just going to stop at the same location. All of this stuff is already set up for you for a typical cross-section sheet, so -140, 40. Interval doesn't really apply here because we're only placing one. Vertical exaggeration of 2 is correct, and these top and bottom clearances, essentially this, the clear space between the profile, the data and the profile. So it's anything it picks up in your view, it goes above and below that, so it kind of gives you a nice clean view of it. So we want to have this create drawing and show dialog box selected, so we're going to click to accept, and we end up with our create drawing window. So I want to again make sure this is called sample XS. My drawing seed is still nothing, and I want to go to 20, and we're going to do no annotation here, and 20 by name boundary. All of this stuff looks good, so I want to go ahead and make sure I hit open model. We're going to click OK, and you can see that it has placed the named boundary in here, but it's kind of sitting in a weird spot. So what we want to do is come in here, and first things first, it's on default, which is not the right level. So we want to come in, change attributes, and it's clip drawing bound DP. Make sure all those are correct. Is in a reference. We got to do it in the default 3D model. And let's go to this, easier to see. So it's actually here, which is where we need to do it. So we got to go where that's live. Clip drawing bound. So let's change it there. And now we should be able to go to our default view. Oh, not our default view, mistake. So now we got our clip drawing bound. So what I want to do here first is, this is one of the other things in the FDOT one that they have not set up yet, is I like to select this as never. So you got a couple options here, allow, always, and never. Allow lets you, so this is basically a reference of the default model, default 3D model. And I may have gone into there and turned levels on and off that I want to be displayed. But I could also come into this drawing model and turn levels on and off, and if it's set to allow, those will stay, and it won't look back at the default model to see how that is set up. So I always like to set up my default model the way I want it to look, and then choose never, because even if I change levels or references here, it always looks back at that default model and looks at that, and that's what it'll always come back to. So I would change this to never. Live nesting, obviously, nesting depth of 99. I mean, you could set that 2 or 3. It doesn't really matter. So we're going to move on to the sheet. And you can see that got updated. So we're going to do the same thing here. I want this to be never. And I want to move this thing down. So really, you're just going to move it down somewhere where you feel kind of comfortable with it. Now, when I made mine, I actually referenced theirs and got it exactly where the original one was, but for this example, I'm just going to slide this guy down. And the other thing we want to do is just slide this little thing over. And it looks like it's moving everything, but it's not. And then we're just going to snap these to the boundaries. And I want to change that to that clip drawing level as well. Okay. Alright, so we're looking pretty good here. We got some things set up. So we're still missing a cell here. And you would just put, whatever cell we want in there. So what I'm going to do is come in here and place my sample EOR logo cell here, and I've set up my cell so it just snaps to this corner. So we're going to put that guy in there. So now we have that. So there's a few other things that we want to do to get this thing set up that I just realized when I was cutting these. And we want to go to Explorer. We're going to click on this, which brings us to the file properties. And I want to set a title. So I'm just going to call this cross-section. And because of the display bug, it doesn't show up right away. So let's just do a little toggle here. And it's there. So these items are going to be filled out by your work set preferences. So I'm not too concerned about those, but we do want to put in the engineer of record thing over here. So the way to get that in there is you click on this and come on over, and it's here. But right now we do not have anything in our pick list. So I'm going to come up here and search pick list, which brings this up. And FDOT has set up some standard pick lists to use. So I'm going to right click and activate that and hit save. And then we can close that. Now when I click this and come on down, I should have engineer to pick from. We should put that engineer of record thing down the side there. Now we have one last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have the proper presentation of our cross sections. So we want to make sure that everything is in wireframe as opposed to smooth shadow or something like that. If you use one of those options, you will have some really nice looking cross sections, but when you print them, you're going to end up with a bunch of black bars in your lines because it's going to print those solid shapes. So we're going to move over here to the drawing model. And I want to click on the references again, and we're going to start here, and we're going to go to presentation here. And I'm going to, if you don't have that, you can right click here and activate that, but we're going to click here. And the big thing you want to look at here is this clip volume settings cut. And we want to make sure that we change this over to wireframe. And we're not done yet. We want to accept the changes and push this to the saved view. So we're going to do that. Now we've pushed it to the saved view, which is here. So that's basically the view that we've created. It has some properties. And we can go over here and see we're on wireframe. But there's one last step, of course. And we need to right click this again and update this from the saved view to make sure that comes across. So we've pretty much done everything that we need to do in this sheet seed file to get our cross sections printing properly. So now we can move on to the next step. Now we're ready to start setting up our motif file for our cross sections. Our motif file is basically a file I'm going to use to pull all of my models and anything I want to be viewed in the cross sections into one file. I'm going to set up how I want that file to look, and then I'm going to use that file to reference into the cross sections using live nesting. So let's start by creating that file. We're going to create file, and we're going to create a model file, and we're going to open it. We can close the create file dialog. Now that we're in here, I want to start attaching some drawings. So I'm basically going to attach everything in here except for the pavement projected. I don't really need those for my cross sections. We're going to hit OK, 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 OK a bunch of times. And I also want to attach my terrain model. fit to view. Let's turn that on. So we kind of want to set this up. Let's set up the default model first. So I'm going to select all of these. I know I don't want some things on in here like default and all these templates. And I'm just going to turn on the 100 scale ticks. And we can leave some of that on. So I just really want these corridors off mostly. Alright, so now we got a pretty decent clean view here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F2. And you know that I don't like the white, so let's get rid of that. And turn that up. Okay. Now that we got that looking the way we want it to look, come in here and you can see that there's a few things on that we don't really need. We don't need these construction lines. We don't need this top mesh. There's a bottom mesh in there. There's several things that we just don't need to see in here. So now we need to set up our default model to properly display all the levels that we want to see. So I can't just do that in this view 2 because the cross-section file kind of looks at view 2, but it also looks at view 1 of the default 3D. So to avoid any confusion, I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to change my display to global display. And I'm going to make sure that I have all of my references selected, and I'm just going to start turning things on and off. So we don't need default. And we want to keep all of these PX and PM levels because those are basically your proposed cross-section levels, proposed template point levels. All those can stay. We want to start looking for some of these EP levels like flow arrow, all these DTM vertices, DTM top mesh and bottom mesh. That's coming from the templates that I created, this source EP. You want to keep this DTM EX because that's your terrain model, so we can just get rid of the EP portion. And contours can go away and construction lines can go away. So once we've done that, we can see that we've kind of gotten rid of all of the elements that we don't need to see in our cross sections. And if we come over here to our default 3D model, it's in a different view, which is strange, but basically the same idea. We can come over here and in view 1 in the global display see that those are also turned off. So if I flip over to my view display, those are grayed out because global display is off. So I basically turned off those levels in every single view that there is. So now that we've done that, we can move on to our cross-section file and get those cross-sections cut. So the first thing I need to do is actually create that cross-section file. So I'm going to come up here to the FDOT toolbar and go to Create File again. And we're going to create RDXSRD, a cross-section file. And we'll hit Create and Open File. And we can hit Close on that. So we're basically here in our default model. And what I want to do is attach that motif file that I just created. And we're going to set up some live nesting. Let's just use live nesting of 2. I know in our seed file it was 99, but you really only need 2. And I want to set it up as never. So never is going to always look back at that motif file and see which levels are on or off, which references are on or off. And even if I change anything in this file, it'll always revert back to that motif file. So I do all my setup in the motif file, and it's properly reflected here in the cross-section file. So then we'll hit attach, OK. And we're going to fit view, and we can see that we have our file here. So I want to activate the terrain model. And we can go ahead and hit F2. Alright, so now we got our nice looking view 2 here. So you can come over here and we want to start laying out our named boundaries. So if you want to do that, you go ahead and click this, and we want to this time choose our sample XS drawing seed. Now if you haven't restarted Openroads Designer since you created your seed file, you might want to do that now because you will not be seeing this showing up here. And the reason for that is two configuration variables. And if we come here and I can just type dgnlib. The first one is this msdgnlib list. So you can see here my location is showing up here by default in the FDOT standards. So if I hit edit on that, that property right here, this work set standards, is directing it towards that work set standards folder and then a dgnlib inside of that and looking for any dgnlibs. So that's basically what I did. I just put it where it needed to be. The other one you need to change is this drawing seeds, which I did have to add an entry here for my work set standard. So I essentially just copied the value from this dgnlib list for here and added it into here. So once I did that, once you do any changes to that configuration variable, you also need to restart Openroads Designer for it to recognize those changes. So once you've done that, you can come in here, find this sample XS, defaults to 1/20. We're going to select our alignment, and it gave it a name, so that's fine. I know that these red lines here are my limits of my model, so I'm going to use those. And I'm going to change my interval here to 100 so I don't have too many cross sections cut here. And we're just going to snap to the end. So you can follow all the prompts down here if you get lost and you don't know what you're doing, but the last prompt here is to accept reject data point. But before I do that, I want to deselect create drawing because I want to kind of show you guys the interim steps as you go through here. So I'm going to place those named boundaries, and then I'm going to come up here to the name boundary window, click this little down arrow, and we can expand out this group, expand out this, and you can see I have a bunch of cross-section stations here. And in order to get those into drawings, you can either select several of these or you can just select the entire group, depending on what you want to do. We're going to annotate plan drawing models and show the create drawing dialog, and as I click those you can see that they highlight to know they're active. I come over here and create cross-section drawing, and now we have our create drawing window. So the name is fine here. It's going to give you a drawing model with the name of the station of the section, and it's going to give you a sheet model with the name of the first station of every cross section on there, which is fine. So we just want to make sure we have our drawing seed again, which is this should be pulling from the name boundary that we just created. We're going to come down here and choose our XS annotation. And one thing to watch out for is if you've created name boundaries previously using a different seed file, you might have this drawing boundary set to new. So just make sure you come down here and set this to sample XS, because if you don't do that, you only get one cross section per sheet, which isn't ideal. So now that we have all those settings done, we can go ahead and hit OK. And we can close out of the name boundaries window and take a look at our cross sections here. So you can see we have the cross sections displayed properly in wireframe. We have some annotation, and our sheet seed seems to be working. We have our engineer of record logo here. We have cross sections. We have the engineer of record note. Pretty much everything is here that we need. So now we can go look at one of these views, and you can see in here that this view is also looking good. Everything's in wireframe. We're only seeing the levels that we want to see, and we have some pretty decent annotation in here. So basically everything that's live in here is the grid, the text, everything but the actual model is live in this file, or in this model. So if you pull out this, you see you have a model for each section, and you have several sheet models telling you the begin station of each section. So that's pretty much it for creating our cross sections. I'm going to switch back to our multi-model views real quick. And this is a good idea to just kind of leave it here when you're done with your cross sections. This is if you need to cut more cross sections or whatever, you can do that as well. Some notes, I guess. This is pretty much the end of this video, but I'm going to do another video shortly about cross-section annotation. So you notice we put that annotation group down, and if we open up our Explorer and go to Openroads Standards and go to our annotation groups and cross-section and drawing, we have this excess annotation that's been placed here. So that's just a standard annotation group that's created by the FDOT to place the annotations that you saw in the cross sections. I've gone ahead and taken a little step further and added some of my own annotations, and in the next video I can show you how to do that. But I hope you've enjoyed the video on creating cross sections, and I hope it helps you out. Thank you.